The journey that eventually became G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra, began decades before the film itself entered production. Unlike many action movies that originate from an original screenplay, this project was built upon one of the most recognizable toy and entertainment brands in American popular culture. The G.I. Joe name had already existed for generations through action figures, animated television series, comic books, novels, and video games. By the time Hollywood seriously considered adapting the property into a live-action blockbuster, the franchise already carried a rich legacy that filmmakers needed to respect while also modernizing it for contemporary audiences. The origins of G.I. Joe date back to the 1960s, when the original action figures were introduced as military-themed collectibles aimed primarily at boys. At the time, the concept of an action figure did not even exist as a marketing term. Instead of calling them dolls, the manufacturer coined the phrase action figure to make the toys more appealing to young male audiences. These early versions represented different branches of the United States military, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. They reflected the patriotic spirit of the era and were heavily influenced by the cultural atmosphere surrounding military service. As the decades passed, the G.I. Joe brand evolved significantly. During the 1980s, it underwent its most famous transformation with the launch of G.I. Joe, a real American hero. Rather than simply depicting soldiers, the franchise introduced an elite multinational special operations team dedicated to protecting the world from Cobra, a mysterious terrorist organization seeking global domination. This reinvention dramatically expanded the property's storytelling possibilities. Suddenly, G.I. Joe was no longer just about military operations. It became a blend of science fiction, espionage, futuristic technology, comic book spectacle, and colorful characters with distinct personalities. The animated television series helped cement the mythology in the minds of millions of children. Every episode showcased imaginative weapons, advanced vehicles, larger-than-life villains, and heroic soldiers working together against impossible odds. At the same time, comic books explored more serious themes and deeper character development, creating a version of the universe that appealed to older readers. Together, these different forms of media established a flexible fictional world that could support a major motion picture. Hollywood had shown interest in adapting G.I. Joe for years, but several factors delayed serious development. One challenge involved translating a toy-based property into a coherent cinematic narrative. Unlike adapting a single novel or comic storyline, G.I. Joe contained decades of characters, conflicting continuities, and evolving lore. Writers faced the difficult task of deciding which elements should remain faithful to the source material and which should be reinvented for modern audiences unfamiliar with the franchise. The enormous commercial success of comic book movies during the early 2000s significantly influenced studio thinking. Films featuring superheroes demonstrated that audiences were eager for large-scale action spectacles built around recognizable intellectual properties. At the same time, toy-based adaptations were becoming increasingly attractive after several high-profile successes convinced studios that existing brands offered valuable name recognition. Executives believed that audiences who had grown up with G.I. Joe during the 1980s might return to theaters out of nostalgia, while younger viewers could discover the franchise for the first time. Another major influence arrived with the unexpected success of Transformers in 2007. Like G.I. Joe, Transformers originated as a toy line developed by the same company. The film proved that a property once considered suitable only for cartoons and toys could become a massive global blockbuster when given enough visual spectacle and modern filmmaking technology. After witnessing Transformers generate enormous worldwide revenue, the studio became much more confident about investing heavily in another toy-based action franchise. Development accelerated as producers began discussing what kind of movie G.I. Joe should become. One possibility involved creating a relatively grounded military thriller inspired by realistic special operations. Another option leaned toward embracing the exaggerated comic book tone that longtime fans remembered from the cartoons. Eventually, the creative team decided to pursue a hybrid approach. The finished concept would combine military realism with futuristic technology, science fiction concepts, and globe-spanning adventure. This decision shaped nearly every aspect of development. Instead of presenting ordinary soldiers using contemporary weapons, the screenplay introduced advanced armored suits, nanotechnology, experimental aircraft, hidden underground bases, and cutting-edge weapon systems. These elements distinguish the film from conventional military action movies while preserving the franchise's reputation for imaginative gadgets and vehicles. Developing the screenplay required balancing numerous competing priorities. Writers needed to introduce an extensive cast of heroes while simultaneously establishing multiple villains, explaining Cobra's origins, presenting advanced technology, and creating an accessible story for audiences with no prior knowledge of G.I. Joe. This was an especially difficult challenge because the franchise contained dozens of iconic characters, many of whom fans expected to see represented on screen. Rather than adapting one specific comic storyline, the screenplay drew inspiration from many different versions of the franchise. Familiar names, organizations, and visual designs were incorporated, but their histories were frequently revised. Some characters received entirely new backstories, while others combined characteristics from multiple interpretations that had appeared throughout the franchise's history. One of the most significant creative decisions involved making Duke the central point-of-view character. Although G.I. Joe has traditionally functioned as an ensemble series with numerous equally important heroes, the filmmakers believed audiences would benefit from following a more conventional protagonist. Duke's introduction as an accomplished soldier allowed viewers to gradually enter the larger G.I. Joe organization alongside him, making the increasingly complex world easier to understand. When G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra entered active production, one of the most important creative decisions was selecting the filmmaker who would shape the project into a cohesive, cinematic experience. The responsibility ultimately fell to Stephen Sommers, a director whose career had become closely associated with large-scale adventure films, energetic action, and a willingness to blend serious stakes with moments of humor and spectacle. His previous work demonstrated that he was comfortable balancing fantasy, science fiction, historical inspiration, and blockbuster entertainment, making him an appealing choice for a franchise that combined military action with futuristic technology. Sommers had already established a recognizable filmmaking style long before joining the G.I. Joe project. Rather than focusing primarily on realism, he preferred creating movies that embraced escapism. His films often featured globe-spanning adventures, larger-than-life villains, hidden civilizations, elaborate action sequences, and heroes who found themselves facing overwhelming odds. Audiences familiar with his earlier work could immediately recognize recurring creative patterns that would eventually become central to G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. One of Sommers' defining characteristics as a filmmaker is his belief that blockbuster entertainment should prioritize momentum. Instead of slowing the narrative with extended philosophical discussions or lengthy periods of introspection, his films tend to move rapidly from one set piece to another. This philosophy heavily influenced the structure of G.I. Joe. Almost every major sequence introduces a new location, a new technological concept, or another action scenario designed to maintain excitement. Whether the characters are racing through city streets, infiltrating secret bases, or engaging in aerial combat, the pace rarely slows for long. This approach reflected Sommers' broader understanding of blockbuster filmmaking. He often viewed action not simply as spectacle, but as a storytelling device. Rather than treating explosions and chase scenes as isolated moments, he used them to introduce characters, reveal relationships, and escalate conflicts. In G.I. Joe, nearly every action sequence also advances the narrative. The convoy attack introduces the elite G.I. Joe organization. The pursuit through Paris demonstrates the capabilities of advanced technology while revealing Cobra's determination. Later battles continue developing character relationships alongside visual spectacle. Sommers also demonstrated a long-standing fascination with secret organizations operating behind the scenes of world history. In several of his previous films, Ancient societies, hidden villains, or mysterious institutions manipulated global events from the shadows. G.I. Joe continues this pattern by presenting both the Joe team and Cobra as organizations unknown to most of the public. Ordinary governments exist within the story, but the real struggle unfolds beneath the surface through covert operations and advanced technology. This hidden world concept gives the film a heightened sense of adventure, suggesting that extraordinary conflicts occur beyond everyday human awareness. Another important aspect of Summers' artistic philosophy involves accessibility. He has often favored straightforward storytelling over complicated narratives filled with ambiguity. Although G.I. Joe contains numerous characters and an extensive fictional mythology, the director presents information in a relatively direct manner. Character motivations are generally clear, heroes and villains are visually distinct, and the central conflict remains easy to follow despite the increasingly elaborate action. This accessibility was especially important because the film needed to introduce newcomers to a franchise with decades of existing history. Summers also believed strongly in visual storytelling. Rather than relying exclusively on dialogue to explain ideas, he frequently used production design, costumes, and environments to communicate information about the fictional world. Cobra's headquarters, for example, immediately establishes the organization's technological sophistication through architecture, lighting, and machinery. Similarly, the G.I. Joe base beneath the Egyptian desert conveys the team's global resources and military capabilities without requiring lengthy exposition. The audience understands these organizations largely through what they see before individual characters begin explaining them. His preference for practical visual storytelling extended to costume design as well. Every major character possesses a distinct silhouette and visual identity. Duke appears as the disciplined military leader. Ripcord projects confidence and humor. Snake Eyes communicates almost entirely through physical movement and costume design rather than dialogue. Cobra Commander gradually evolves visually throughout the narrative, reflecting his transformation into the iconic villain recognized by longtime fans. Summers understood that audiences often form immediate impressions through appearance, making costume design an essential storytelling tool. Influence from classic adventure serials can also be seen throughout the film. Early 20th century adventure stories often featured exotic locations, daring rescues, elaborate villain headquarters, and heroes racing against time to prevent catastrophic disasters. Summers embraced many of these traditions. The narrative carries viewers from military installations to polar regions, underwater facilities, ancient castles, metropolitan cities, and underground complexes. This constant movement creates a sense of global adventure rather than limiting the story to a single battlefield. Another recurring influence comes from comic books themselves. Although G.I. Joe originated as a toy line before expanding into comics, Summers approached the material with an understanding of comic book storytelling techniques. Characters possess highly recognizable visual identities. Villains often survive situations that would seem impossible in more realistic films. Action scenes emphasize dramatic poses, exaggerated technology, and colorful confrontations rather than strict military realism. This comic-inspired sensibility helped preserve the spirit of the original franchise even as it was adapted into live action. One of the defining characteristics of G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, is the ambitious way it constructs its fictional world. Although the film is set in a recognizable version of modern Earth, it presents a reality that exists just beneath the surface of everyday life. Most ordinary citizens continue with their daily routines, unaware that highly advanced military organizations, revolutionary technologies, and secret global conspiracies are operating around them. This hidden world approach allows the movie to blend realism with science fiction, creating a setting that feels both familiar and fantastical at the same time. Unlike many science fiction films that transport audiences to distant planets or entirely fictional civilizations, The Rise of Cobra keeps its story grounded within real-world geography. Major cities, famous landmarks, recognizable governments, and existing military institutions all remain part of the narrative. However, beneath this realistic foundation exists an invisible network of secret organizations whose influence extends across the globe. The audience is invited to imagine that every major world event could potentially have unseen forces working behind the scenes. The central concept behind the film's world building is secrecy. Nearly every important location exists beyond the knowledge of ordinary society. The G.I. Joe organization operates from an enormous underground headquarters hidden beneath the Egyptian desert. Cobra maintains equally secret facilities, allowing both sides to prepare for conflict without public awareness. This creates the impression that the visible world is only one layer of a much larger reality. This hidden infrastructure becomes one of the film's most important storytelling devices. Rather than relying on traditional military bases or government offices, the movie introduces futuristic command centers filled with cutting-edge technology. These environments communicate power, intelligence, and global reach. Every room is designed to reinforce the idea that the organizations possess resources far beyond those available to conventional armed forces. The G.I. Joe headquarters serves as one of the film's most memorable settings. Located beneath the desert, the base functions as the operational heart of the entire organization. It contains aircraft hangars, command centers, laboratories, training facilities, weapons development divisions, intelligence operations, and living quarters for personnel. The sheer scale of the base immediately establishes that G.I. Joe is not simply another military unit. Instead, it is portrayed as one of the most advanced defense organizations ever assembled. Its underground location also carries symbolic meaning. By placing the headquarters beneath the sands of Egypt, the film connects humanity's ancient past with its technological future. Egypt has long been associated with monumental architecture, hidden tombs, and mysterious civilizations. Building the G.I. Joe base beneath this landscape subtly reinforces the idea that extraordinary secrets have always existed beneath the surface of history. The architecture inside the headquarters reflects efficiency rather than luxury. Wide corridors, metallic surfaces, holographic displays, advanced computers, and aircraft launch systems emphasize functionality. Every area appears designed for rapid deployment during international crises. Even without extensive dialogue, viewers understand that this organization must respond quickly to threats anywhere in the world. In contrast, Cobra's various facilities emphasize intimidation and technological dominance. While the G.I. Joe base projects professionalism and cooperation, Cobra's environments often feel colder, more industrial, and more isolated. Lighting plays a significant role in establishing mood. Dark shadows, blue illumination, polished metal, and futuristic machinery create an atmosphere of secrecy and danger. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Cobra's world building is its connection to legitimate business. Rather than existing solely as an underground terrorist organization, Cobra develops influence through Mars Industries, a massive weapons manufacturer led by James McCullen. This corporate front allows Cobra to conduct research, develop experimental technology, and establish political relationships while maintaining a respectable public image. The blending of multinational business interests with hidden criminal ambitions gives the fictional universe additional complexity. This approach reflects an important storytelling principle throughout the movie. Very little exists in complete isolation. Governments interact with corporations. Scientific research influences military strategy. Personal relationships affect international events. Every major institution appears interconnected, creating the impression of a tightly woven global system where decisions made in one location quickly influence events elsewhere. Geography plays an equally important role in shaping the narrative. Rather than limiting itself to a single country, the story travels across multiple continents. This constant movement reinforces the international nature of both G.I. Joe and Cobra. The heroes cannot simply defend one city or nation because the threat itself operates globally. The opening mission introduces military operations in Central Asia, immediately establishing an international scope. Shortly afterward, the story shifts to Egypt, where viewers discover the Joe headquarters. From there, the narrative expands even further through locations that include Washington, D.C., Paris, the Arctic, and underwater installations hidden beneath polar ice. Each location serves a specific narrative function. Paris provides one of the film's largest action sequences while demonstrating the destructive capabilities of nanomite weapons. Washington represents political authority and global leadership. The Arctic becomes an ideal location for Cobra's hidden base because its remote environment naturally conceals advanced facilities. Every destination advances both the story and the audience's understanding of the fictional world. One of the reasons G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra stands apart from many action films released during the late 2000s is its willingness to blend multiple genres into a single cinematic experience. Rather than belonging exclusively to one category, the film combines elements of military action, science fiction, espionage, superhero adventure, comic book storytelling, techno-thriller, and even disaster cinema. This mixture allows the movie to appeal to a broad audience while also reflecting the diverse history of the G.I. Joe franchise itself. Since the original property existed across toys, comics, cartoons, and novels, it never fit neatly into one genre. The film continues that tradition by creating a hybrid style where several genres constantly overlap. At its core, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra is first and foremost an action film. Nearly every section of the narrative is driven by physical conflict. Characters engage in gunfights, martial arts battles, aerial dogfights, high-speed vehicle chases, explosions, and large-scale military operations. The action rarely pauses for long, establishing an energetic rhythm that keeps audiences engaged through constant movement. Instead of relying on dialogue-heavy storytelling, the film frequently advances the plot through action itself. Important character introductions, emotional developments, and major turning points often occur during combat rather than quiet conversations. The film follows many conventions of traditional action cinema. The heroes possess exceptional combat skills, advanced weapons, and specialized training. The villains threaten global catastrophe through increasingly dangerous plans. Every major confrontation escalates the stakes until the final battle determines the fate of the world. Audiences familiar with blockbuster action movies immediately recognize this structure, making the story accessible even when its science fiction concepts become more elaborate. However, military action alone does not define the film. A second major genre is science fiction. Unlike realistic war films that rely upon existing technology, The Rise of Cobra imagines a future where scientific breakthroughs have dramatically altered warfare. Nanomite weapons, accelerator suits, advanced aircraft, holographic communication systems, underwater fortresses, and experimental energy technologies transform the conflict into something far beyond conventional military operations. The science fiction presented in the film belongs to what is sometimes called speculative technology rather than deep scientific exploration. The movie is less interested in explaining the exact mechanics of its inventions than in imagining how revolutionary technology might reshape global power. Scientific concepts become storytelling tools that create exciting action sequences while raising the scale of the conflict. Nanotechnology serves as the clearest example of this approach. In reality, nanotechnology remains a complex and highly specialized scientific field, but the film expands the concept into fictional territory. The nanomites become nearly unstoppable weapons capable of consuming buildings, vehicles, and infrastructure. Their existence instantly raises the stakes beyond ordinary military conflict because traditional defenses become largely ineffective. This allows the movie to explore scenarios impossible within realistic warfare. Another major genre influencing the film is espionage. Although the story contains spectacular action, much of its narrative revolves around secret organizations, covert missions, intelligence gathering, hidden identities, and international conspiracies. G.I. Joe itself functions as an elite covert organization operating beyond public knowledge. Cobra similarly exists in secrecy while infiltrating legitimate institutions through deception and manipulation. Many familiar spy movie conventions appear throughout the film. Secret headquarters remain hidden beneath remote landscapes. Advanced gadgets provide tactical advantages. Double agents manipulate both sides. Disguises conceal true identities. Intelligence briefings precede dangerous missions. International travel connects distant locations into one continuous operation. These elements strongly recall classic espionage cinema, while blending naturally with military action and science fiction. The influence of spy fiction is especially visible in the way information functions within the narrative. Victory often depends not only on superior firepower, but also on discovering hidden plans before catastrophe occurs. Characters investigate suspicious activities, track stolen weapons, decode enemy strategies, and attempt to expose concealed threats. This investigative dimension gives the action greater narrative purpose because battles emerge from intelligence operations rather than random confrontation. Superhero storytelling also shapes many aspects of the film, even though none of the characters possess supernatural abilities. Like superheroes, the members of G.I. Joe each have specialized talents, distinctive costumes, memorable code names, and unique combat styles. Snake Eyes embodies the silent martial arts master. Scarlet represents intelligence and precision. Heavy Duty specializes in overwhelming firepower. Ripcord provides aerial expertise. Duke serves as the determined field leader. These clearly defined roles resemble comic book teams such as the Avengers, the Justice League, or the X-Men, where individual personalities contribute specific strengths to a larger mission. The film celebrates teamwork rather than focusing exclusively on one protagonist. Every member contributes different abilities, reinforcing the idea that no single hero can overcome Cobra alone. The villains follow similar comic book traditions. Cobra Commander gradually transforms into an iconic masked antagonist whose ambitions extend far beyond personal wealth or revenge. Destro combines scientific genius with corporate influence. The Baroness functions as both assassin and strategist. Storm Shadow brings exceptional martial arts ability while maintaining personal ties to Snake Eyes. Each villain possesses recognizable characteristics that make them immediately identifiable within the larger ensemble. The opening sequence of G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, performs one of the most important tasks in blockbuster filmmaking. Within approximately the first 15 minutes, it must introduce the audience to the tone of the movie, establish the central conflict, present the first major characters, demonstrate the scale of the world, and convince viewers that they are about to experience a globe-spanning action adventure. Rather than beginning with lengthy exposition or slow character development, the film immediately immerses the audience in a mixture of historical context, military action, and mystery. From its very first scene, it communicates that this is a story where history, technology, and warfare are deeply connected. The movie opens not in the modern day, but centuries in the past. The audience is transported to 17th century France, where an ancestor of James McCullen is being punished after selling defective weapons that contributed to a military defeat. Forced to wear a brutal iron mask as part of his sentence, the disgraced weapons supplier becomes the foundation for one of the film's recurring visual symbols. This opening serves several narrative purposes simultaneously. On a basic level, it creates immediate curiosity. Viewers have not yet met any of the modern characters, but they are already presented with an event that clearly carries long-term significance. The audience naturally wonders why a futuristic action movie would begin hundreds of years earlier, and how this historical punishment will connect to the present-day story. The sequence also establishes one of the film's central themes, the relationship between weapons, power, and human ambition. Long before nanotechnology enters the story, the opening demonstrates that mankind has always pursued increasingly powerful methods of warfare. The McCullen family's involvement in weapons manufacturing stretches back generations, suggesting that technological advancement and military conflict have always evolved together. The Iron Mask itself becomes a powerful piece of visual foreshadowing. Although first presented as an instrument of punishment, it quietly prepares audiences for events that occur much later in the narrative. Rather than feeling like a random costume choice when Cobra Commander eventually appears, the concept has already been planted in the audience's mind during the opening moments. From a thematic perspective, the prologue suggests that history is cyclical. Human beings repeatedly develop more advanced weapons, believing they can control their consequences. Instead, these inventions often create larger conflicts. The story will later demonstrate this pattern through nanomite technology, which represents the latest and most dangerous chapter in centuries of military innovation. After this historical introduction, the film transitions sharply into the modern era. This sudden shift immediately changes the pacing. Quiet historical drama gives way to contemporary military operations, signaling that the movie intends to combine multiple storytelling styles. The audience leaves behind castles and swords in favor of armored vehicles, advanced weaponry, and modern soldiers. The first major modern characters introduced are Duke and Ripcord, members of a military convoy assigned to escort highly valuable warheads. Their introduction is intentionally straightforward. They are not presented as superheroes or secret agents. Instead, they initially appear to be experienced soldiers performing an important but routine mission. This choice is significant because it gives audiences a familiar point of entry into the increasingly fantastic world that follows. Rather than beginning inside the technologically advanced G.I. Joe headquarters, viewers first experience events through relatively ordinary military personnel. As Duke discovers the existence of G.I. Joe, the audience learns alongside him. The conversation between Duke and Ripcord immediately establishes their friendship. Their dialogue feels relaxed despite the seriousness of their assignment. They joke with one another, exchange observations, and demonstrate the easy camaraderie that often develops between soldiers who have spent considerable time together. This relationship performs several important storytelling functions. First, it humanizes the characters before the action begins. Instead of existing merely as action heroes, they become believable friends whose loyalty will influence later decisions. Second, the lighter tone creates emotional balance. The audience enjoys brief moments of humor before the impending danger arrives, making the sudden shift into combat feel more dramatic. Their personalities are also distinguished almost immediately. Duke appears disciplined, responsible, and focused on completing the mission. Ripcord, while equally capable, projects greater confidence and a more playful attitude. These contrasting personalities create natural chemistry that remains important throughout the film. The convoy itself becomes another form of environmental storytelling. Multiple armored vehicles travel through a remote landscape under heavy military protection, communicating that the cargo must be extraordinarily valuable. Even before the audience learns exactly what the warheads contain, the security surrounding them suggests their enormous importance. This careful build-up generates suspense. The audience understands that something valuable is being transported, but the exact nature of the threat remains unclear. Questions naturally emerge. Who wants these weapons? Why are they so important? What makes this mission different from countless other military operations? The answers arrive quickly when the convoy comes under attack. The ambush introduces one of the film's most memorable early visual surprises. Instead of facing conventional soldiers or terrorists, Duke and Ripcord encounter attackers equipped with highly advanced accelerator suits. These suits allow Cobra operatives to run at incredible speeds, leap enormous distances, smash through obstacles, and overpower conventional military forces. Conflict is the driving force behind every successful action film. And in G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, the filmmakers construct multiple layers of conflict that operate simultaneously throughout the narrative. While the movie appears on the surface to be a straightforward battle between heroes and villains, a closer examination reveals that several different forms of conflict constantly interact with one another. External military confrontations, personal rivalries, emotional relationships, ideological differences, technological competition, and questions of identity all combine to create a story that continually raises its stakes from beginning to end. The most obvious conflict is the external struggle between G.I. Joe and Cobra. This serves as the central narrative around which every other storyline revolves. G.I. Joe exists to protect global security, while Cobra seeks to reshape the balance of world power through fear, advanced technology, and manipulation. Every mission, battle, and strategic decision ultimately contributes to this larger confrontation. What makes this external conflict particularly effective is that neither side functions as a conventional military force. Instead, both organizations operate outside normal political structures. Governments exist within the story, but they often react to events rather than controlling them. The true conflict unfolds between two highly specialized organizations possessing technologies and resources unavailable to ordinary nations. This immediately expands the scope of the story. Rather than depicting a regional war or a localized terrorist attack, the film presents a struggle whose consequences could affect every country simultaneously. The conflict is not confined by borders because both organizations possess the ability to operate anywhere in the world. The catalyst for the entire narrative is Cobra's attempt to obtain the nanomite warheads. At first glance, this objective appears relatively straightforward. One organization wants to steal dangerous weapons, while another seeks to prevent the theft. However, as the story develops, audiences realize that the warheads represent something much larger than valuable military equipment. The nanomite technology symbolizes ultimate control over modern civilization. Unlike traditional explosives, the nanomites possess the ability to consume almost any material. Buildings, military installations, infrastructure, monuments, and defensive fortifications all become vulnerable. This dramatically changes the balance of power within the fictional universe. Historically, civilizations have relied upon walls, fortresses, armies, and geography for protection. Nanomite technology effectively eliminates many of these traditional advantages. Whoever controls the nanomites possesses the ability to threaten virtually any location regardless of conventional defenses. This creates the film's first major escalation of stakes. Initially, audiences believe Cobra simply wants to steal advanced weapons. Soon it becomes clear that Cobra intends to use these weapons to reshape global politics itself. As the narrative progresses, the stakes continue increasing. After successfully acquiring the nanomites, Cobra demonstrates their destructive potential during the attack on Paris. This sequence represents a turning point in the story because the threat shifts from theoretical possibility to undeniable reality. Before Paris, governments might still underestimate Cobra. After Paris, the entire world witnesses what the nanomites can accomplish. This escalation is important because audiences no longer imagine hypothetical destruction. They see it happening. Familiar streets, recognizable architecture, and ordinary civilians suddenly become part of a catastrophic demonstration of technological warfare. The destruction of a famous international city communicates that nowhere is truly safe. This transforms Cobra from a dangerous criminal organization into a genuine global threat. Alongside this large-scale conflict exists a much more personal struggle involving Duke. Unlike many action heroes whose motivations remain relatively simple, Duke carries emotional baggage into the story. His past relationship with Anna Lewis becomes one of the film's most significant internal conflicts. Years before the events of the movie, Duke and Anna planned a future together. However, military duty and personal choices ultimately separated them. When Duke unexpectedly encounters Anna again, she has become the Baroness, one of Cobra's most dangerous operatives. This revelation creates an emotional conflict that cannot be solved through combat alone. Duke faces two competing realities. The woman standing before him serves the enemy, yet she is also someone he once loved deeply. His military responsibilities demand that he stop Cobra at all costs. His personal feelings make that task emotionally complicated. This internal struggle humanizes Duke throughout the film. Without Anna, he could risk becoming a fairly conventional action protagonist defined primarily by bravery and competence. Instead, his emotional conflict forces him to question whether the person he once knew still exists beneath the Baroness persona. Importantly, this conflict influences his decisions. Rather than treating Anna as merely another enemy combatant, Duke continually searches for signs that her former identity remains intact. His determination to save rather than destroy her reflects one of the movie's recurring themes. People can be manipulated, but redemption remains possible. Anna experiences her own internal conflict, although much of it remains hidden during the early portions of the narrative. Her loyalty to Cobra is not entirely voluntary. Scientific manipulation has altered her thoughts and emotions, creating tension between her authentic identity and the role Cobra forces her to perform. This adds another psychological layer to the story. Rather than portraying villainy as entirely self-chosen, the film explores how technology can influence free will itself. This concept parallels the broader dangers of Cobra's scientific ambitions. If technology can control individual minds, it can potentially control entire societies. Another major conflict centers on Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Unlike Duke's emotional struggle, this rivalry originates from shared history and personal betrayal. Their relationship extends back many years to their martial arts training. Once brothers in spirit, they now stand on opposite sides of the global conflict. This storyline introduces themes of loyalty, honor, and revenge. One of the defining characteristics of G.I. Joe, the Rise of Cobra, is that its opposition is not represented by a single villain. Instead, the film presents a network of antagonistic forces that operate together while pursuing different personal ambitions. Cobra functions as the primary enemy, but within the organization, each major character possesses distinct motivations, histories, and objectives. This layered approach creates a more dynamic conflict because the heroes are not simply fighting one individual. They are confronting an entire system built upon manipulation, technological superiority, deception, and the pursuit of power. At the center of the film's antagonistic forces is Cobra itself. More than a terrorist organization, Cobra represents an alternative vision for the future of the world. Rather than seeking cooperation among nations, Cobra believes that global control could be achieved through fear, advanced technology, and absolute domination. Its members view military power not as a means of defense, but as the ultimate instrument of political authority. This ideological difference separates Cobra from ordinary criminal organizations. While many fictional villains seek wealth through illegal activity, Cobra's ambitions extend much further. Money serves only as a tool for acquiring greater influence. The true objective is control itself. Every operation throughout the movie, whether stealing nanomite warheads or manipulating political events, contributes toward creating a world where Cobra dictates the balance of power. The organization also reflects one of the film's recurring themes, the corruption of scientific progress. Cobra consistently turns technological innovation into weapons of domination. Scientific discoveries that could potentially improve humanity instead become instruments of destruction. This philosophy directly opposes G.I. Joe's belief that technology should exist primarily to protect people. Although Cobra operates as a unified organization, its leadership consists of several individuals whose personal goals are not always identical. Their differing motivations create internal complexity while preventing the antagonist from feeling one-dimensional. James McCullen, later known as Destro, initially appears to be the central villain. As the head of Mars Industries, he occupies a unique position because he exists simultaneously within legitimate society and the hidden criminal world. Publicly, he is an influential businessman responsible for developing advanced military technology. Secretly, he supplies Cobra with the very weapons capable of threatening global security. This dual identity makes McCullen particularly interesting. Unlike traditional villains who operate entirely outside the law, he manipulates legitimate political and economic systems for personal gain. His wealth, corporate influence, and scientific expertise allow him to shape world events without immediately revealing his true intentions. McCullen embodies unchecked ambition. Throughout the film, he repeatedly demonstrates confidence in his own intelligence and technological achievements. He believes that scientific innovation naturally grants authority to those capable of creating it. In his mind, possessing superior technology justifies exercising greater control over society. This worldview represents one of the film's central ideological conflicts. McCullen measures success through power and influence. Moral considerations remain secondary to technological advancement and personal achievement. Another defining aspect of McCullen's character is his family legacy. The opening scene establishes that his ancestors manufactured weapons centuries earlier, connecting him to a long history of warfare. This historical continuity suggests that his ambitions did not emerge suddenly. Instead, they represent the latest evolution of a family tradition built around creating increasingly sophisticated instruments of conflict. The transformation of McCullen into Destro also carries symbolic significance. His injuries and subsequent reconstruction through advanced technology blur the line between humanity and machinery. The iconic metal mask not only references the G.I. Joe source material, but also symbolizes the gradual loss of ordinary human identity beneath technological enhancement and obsession with power. If McCullen represents corporate ambition, Cobra Commander embodies manipulation. Unlike McCullen, Cobra Commander rarely relies upon public authority or legitimate institutions. Instead, he operates from the shadows, orchestrating events while allowing others to believe they remain in control. His greatest weapon is not physical strength, but psychological influence. Throughout the narrative, Cobra Commander manipulates nearly everyone around him. He deceives McCullen. He controls Anna through scientific experimentation. He influences political events indirectly. He carefully positions himself to benefit regardless of which allies succeed or fail. This ability to manipulate others makes him significantly more dangerous than a conventional battlefield commander. Physically, Cobra Commander spends much of the story hidden behind disguises and secret identities. This concealment reinforces his symbolic role. He represents hidden corruption rather than open aggression. Audiences rarely know exactly how much control he possesses until the narrative gradually reveals the full extent of his plans. His eventual appearance wearing the familiar mask completes a symbolic transformation that began long before the film's opening scenes. The mask removes nearly all traces of ordinary humanity, replacing personal identity with ideological fanaticism. Cobra Commander no longer functions primarily as an individual. He becomes the living embodiment of Cobra's philosophy. Unlike many cinematic villains motivated by revenge or personal trauma alone, Cobra Commander seeks systematic domination. He wants to reshape civilization according to his own vision of order. This makes him a particularly effective long-term antagonist because his ambitions naturally extend beyond the events of one film. Anna Lewis, known as the Baroness, occupies a unique position among the antagonists because she represents both villain and victim simultaneously. When audiences first encounter her, she appears completely committed to Cobra's mission. She demonstrates remarkable combat ability, confidence, intelligence, and emotional detachment. Her black tactical uniform, calm demeanor, and precise fighting style immediately establish her as one of Cobra's most formidable operatives. Although G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra is built around a large ensemble cast, the narrative is primarily experienced through the perspective of Conrad Duke Hauser. While characters such as Snake Eyes, Scarlet, Ripcord, and General Hawk all receive meaningful roles, Duke functions as the audience's principal point-of-view character. He begins the story as a highly capable but otherwise conventional soldier and gradually becomes one of the world's most important defenders. His development closely follows many elements of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, while also fitting comfortably within the three-act structure and the Save the Cat storytelling model. The film does not follow these frameworks perfectly, but many of its major story beats align remarkably well with classic narrative theory. One reason Duke's journey works effectively is that he begins in a relatively ordinary world before being introduced to a much larger reality. This allows audiences unfamiliar with the G.I. Joe universe to discover its secrets alongside him. Instead of beginning inside the elite organization, viewers first meet Duke as an experienced military officer carrying out what appears to be a standard assignment. His understanding of the world closely matches the audience's own. The hero's journey begins with the ordinary world. At the beginning of the film, Duke serves as an accomplished soldier in the United States Army. He understands military discipline, leadership, and combat, but he has no knowledge of the hidden organizations operating beneath global politics. His life is structured around traditional military service rather than secret international missions. This stage also introduces his emotional baggage. Long before the main conflict begins, Duke's relationship with Anna Lewis has already ended. Although he has continued with his military career, the audience quickly senses that this unfinished relationship still affects him. The emotional wound established here later becomes central to his personal journey. The film wisely avoids portraying Duke as an inexperienced recruit. Instead, he is already competent, respected, and courageous. His transformation therefore concerns expanding his worldview rather than learning basic heroism. The call to adventure arrives when Duke and Ripcord are assigned to escort the nanomite warheads. Initially, this appears to be another routine military operation. However, the convoy attack immediately reveals that the mission involves dangers far beyond ordinary warfare. The appearance of Cobra's accelerator suits fundamentally changes Duke's understanding of reality. Suddenly, he discovers that highly advanced technology exists outside conventional military knowledge. The world becomes much larger and more dangerous than he previously imagined. In hero's journey terminology, this moment invites the protagonist to cross beyond familiar experience into an extraordinary realm. Unlike many fantasy stories where magical creatures introduce the adventure, G.I. Joe substitutes futuristic science and hidden organizations. The principle remains the same. The ordinary world gives way to a previously unseen reality. Traditional heroes' journey stories often include a refusal of the call, where the protagonist hesitates before accepting the adventure. In Duke's case, this stage appears only briefly. Rather than rejecting responsibility, he initially expresses confusion about what he has witnessed. The existence of G.I. Joe itself seems almost unbelievable. However, his military personality naturally inclines him toward action rather than avoidance. Instead of refusing the journey, he quickly adapts to changing circumstances. This slight modification reflects Duke's identity as an experienced soldier. Someone trained to respond under pressure would realistically hesitate less than an ordinary civilian suddenly encountering extraordinary events. The meeting with the mentor occurs when Duke enters the G.I. Joe organization. Interestingly, the film distributes the traditional mentor role among several characters instead of assigning it to one wise teacher. General Hawk serves as Duke's primary institutional mentor. He introduces Duke to the larger mission, explains the organization's purpose, and evaluates his potential. Hawk provides guidance through leadership rather than mystical wisdom. Scarlet contributes another form of mentorship. She familiarizes Duke with the advanced technology, operational procedures, and culture of G.I. Joe. Other team members also assist his transition. Rather than receiving one dramatic lesson, Duke gradually learns from an entire community of experienced specialists. This collaborative approach fits the film's emphasis on teamwork. Crossing the first threshold occurs when Duke officially enters G.I. Joe headquarters beneath the Egyptian desert. This moment represents much more than arriving at a new location. It symbolizes his complete departure from the ordinary military world. Everything inside the headquarters demonstrates that conventional reality no longer applies. Advanced aircraft, experimental weapons, elite operatives, global intelligence systems, hidden technology. Duke realizes he has entered a level of military operations previously unknown even to highly trained soldiers. The threshold separates his former life from his new identity. There can be no return to complete normalcy because he now understands truths hidden from most of humanity. The next stage involves tests, allies, and enemies. This occupies much of the film's middle section. Duke forms stronger relationships with Scarlet, Ripcord, Snake Eyes, Heavy Duty, and the rest of the G.I. Joe team. He earns their trust through competence rather than reputation. At the same time, he encounters increasingly dangerous enemies. The Baroness, Storm Shadow, Destro, Cobra Commander. Each antagonist challenges him differently. Some test his combat abilities. Others challenge his emotional stability. The Baroness creates perhaps the most difficult test because she forces Duke to balance professional duty with personal feelings. His allies also contribute to his growth. Ripcord reminds him of the importance of optimism. General Hawk demonstrates responsible leadership. Snake Eyes quietly illustrates discipline and sacrifice through action rather than words. Every relationship teaches Duke something necessary for later success. Approaching the inmost cave represents preparation for confronting Cobra directly. One of the defining aspects of G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, is its heavy reliance on technology, both within the fictional world of the story and behind the scenes during production. Unlike many military action films that focus primarily on realistic weapons and practical combat, this movie embraces futuristic science fiction on an enormous scale. Advanced nanotechnology, accelerator suits, experimental aircraft, underwater bases, holographic communication systems, and highly stylized action sequences all required extensive collaboration between visual effects artists, production designers, stunt coordinators, costume designers, practical effects teams, and digital animation studios. The result is a film that uses technology not simply to create spectacle, but to establish its identity as a modern science fiction adventure inspired by comic books and action toys. By the late 2000s, digital visual effects had advanced significantly. Films released during this period increasingly blended practical filmmaking with computer-generated imagery, allowing directors to create worlds and action sequences that would have been impossible only a decade earlier. G.I. Joe arrived during this era of rapid technological development, taking full advantage of improvements in CGI while still incorporating traditional filmmaking techniques wherever possible. Director Stephen Sommers had already gained considerable experience working with visual effects on previous productions. His earlier films frequently combined live-action performances with digitally created environments, creatures, and large-scale action sequences. Because of this background, he approached G.I. Joe with a clear understanding that digital technology would be essential rather than supplementary. From the earliest stages of production, many sequences were planned with computer-generated imagery already integrated into the filmmaking process. One of the first technological concepts introduced in the movie is the accelerator suit. These powerful exoskeletons dramatically enhance the physical capabilities of the soldiers wearing them. They allow characters to run at extraordinary speeds, jump across rooftops, survive massive impacts, and smash through obstacles that would normally be impossible for human beings. From a storytelling perspective, the accelerator suits immediately establish that this world operates beyond conventional military realism. They signal to audiences that technology has advanced to the point where ordinary human limitations can be overcome through engineering. Creating these sequences required an intricate combination of practical stunt work and digital enhancement. Actors performed many movements themselves while wearing specially designed costume components. However, because the suits enabled impossible speeds and superhuman jumps, visual effects artists extended these performances through CGI. Computer-generated environments, digital doubles, and simulated physics allowed characters to leap across city streets, sprint faster than vehicles, and perform acrobatic maneuvers beyond the limits of practical filmmaking. The Paris chase remains one of the clearest demonstrations of this approach. Rather than relying entirely on practical stunts or completely digital animation, The sequence blends multiple techniques together. Real actors perform close-up moments. Professional stunt performers execute physically achievable movements. Digital doubles replace the performers during impossible leaps. Computer-generated backgrounds extend the environment whenever necessary. The audience experiences what appears to be one continuous action sequence, even though it combines numerous filmmaking methods. This blending of practical and digital effects became increasingly common in blockbuster cinema during the late 2000s. Another major technological achievement involves the nanomites. Within the story, nanomites are microscopic machines capable of consuming nearly any material. Although real-world nanotechnology exists primarily within scientific research and engineering, the film imagines a highly fictionalized version capable of devastating entire cities. Visually representing something microscopic presented an interesting challenge. Because audiences cannot realistically observe individual nanomites, the filmmakers developed distinctive visual effects that suggest enormous swarms moving collectively through structures. Buildings appear to dissolve from the inside outward. Steel collapses. Concrete crumbles. Vehicles disintegrate. These destruction effects required sophisticated computer simulations capable of realistically portraying thousands of interconnected structural failures. Unlike traditional explosions, where destruction occurs almost instantly, nanomite damage spreads progressively. Visual effects artists, therefore, had to simulate gradual consumption rather than simple detonation. This unique style of destruction helps distinguish the film from countless other action movies featuring ordinary explosives. The audience recognizes nanomite attacks immediately because they possess their own visual language. Instead of fireballs dominating the screen, viewers witness structures appearing almost to decay in real time. The Paris sequence serves as the film's largest demonstration of this technology. Entire sections of a city become vulnerable to the nanomites, creating large-scale destruction that combines practical photography with extensive digital reconstruction. Many real-world locations were photographed and scanned to ensure architectural accuracy. Visual effects teams then digitally modified these environments to simulate catastrophic damage while preserving recognizable landmarks. This careful combination allows audiences to recognize familiar locations even as they undergo extraordinary transformation. The G.I. Joe headquarters beneath the Egyptian desert also showcases the production's technological ambitions. Although certain physical sets were constructed for actors to interact with, the enormous scale of the facility required extensive digital expansion. Hangars extend far beyond the built environments. Aircraft launch systems continue into computer-generated spaces. Large command centers combine physical consoles with digitally enhanced displays. This technique creates the illusion of an underground complex vastly larger than anything that could realistically be built on a soundstage. Similarly, Cobra's Arctic headquarters relies heavily upon digital production design. At first glance, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra appears to be a film driven almost entirely by spectacle. Massive explosions, futuristic technology, high-speed chases, and globe-spanning action dominate much of its running time. However, beneath the surface of the visual effects and military conflict lies a deliberate effort to create emotional investment through relationships, loyalty, redemption, sacrifice, and personal history. While the movie does not pursue the same level of emotional complexity found in dramatic films, it understands that audiences care more deeply about action when they are emotionally connected to the people experiencing it. Every major action sequence gains additional meaning because it is tied to characters with personal motivations rather than anonymous heroes simply completing missions. The emotional foundation of the film is built primarily around Duke. Although the movie features an ensemble cast, Duke serves as the audience's emotional anchor because viewers experience much of the story through his perspective. Unlike a hero motivated solely by patriotism or duty, Duke enters the narrative carrying unresolved personal pain. His previous relationship with Anna Lewis continues to influence his thoughts long before Cobra re-enters his life. This emotional history immediately gives Duke greater depth than a traditional action protagonist. He is not beginning a completely new chapter in his life. Instead, the adventure forces him to confront a part of his past that he believed was permanently over. When he unexpectedly encounters Anna again, now transformed into the Baroness, the conflict becomes intensely personal. This reunion is one of the film's most important emotional turning points. Initially, Duke cannot reconcile the woman standing before him with the person he once loved. The contrast is striking. Anna, once warm and compassionate, now appears emotionally distant, highly disciplined, and completely loyal to Cobra. The audience shares Duke's confusion because the transformation seems almost impossible. Rather than immediately accepting that Anna has become irredeemably evil, Duke continually searches for traces of the woman he remembers. This decision reveals one of his defining qualities: hope. Many action heroes respond to betrayal with anger or revenge. Duke instead responds with determination to understand what happened. He believes people deserve the opportunity to be saved, even when circumstances appear hopeless. This emotional resilience distinguishes him from more cynical protagonists. The audience becomes invested not simply in whether Duke defeats Cobra, but whether he can reclaim someone he believed he had lost forever. Anna's storyline contributes significantly to the emotional weight of the narrative. Although she initially functions as one of Cobra's most dangerous operatives, later revelations reveal that her loyalty has been manipulated through scientific experimentation. This changes how audiences interpret her actions. Rather than existing purely as a villain, she becomes another victim of Cobra's abuse of technology. The tragedy lies in the loss of identity. The real Anna still exists beneath the Baroness persona, but her memories and emotions have been distorted. This concept introduces one of the film's central emotional themes. Technology may alter behavior, but it cannot completely erase humanity. When fragments of Anna's former self begin resurfacing, audiences experience satisfaction because emotional connection proves stronger than artificial manipulation. Her gradual redemption reinforces the optimistic worldview that defines much of the movie. Another emotionally significant relationship exists between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Unlike Duke and Anna, whose conflict centers on love and memory, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow represent brotherhood broken by betrayal. Flashbacks reveal that the two once trained together under the same martial arts master. They learned the same discipline, shared the same home, pursued the same goals. Somewhere along the way, their paths separated completely. This shared history transforms every confrontation between them. The audience understands that neither character views the other as simply another opponent. Every sword strike carries years of unresolved pain. Every duel represents unfinished emotional business rather than ordinary combat. Their rivalry illustrates another recurring theme. People with similar beginnings can arrive at dramatically different destinations depending upon the choices they make. Snake Eyes represents discipline guided by honor. Storm Shadow represents discipline consumed by resentment. Because their abilities are nearly equal, their emotional differences become more important than their physical skills. General Hawk provides another source of emotional stability. Unlike many military commanders portrayed as distant authority figures, Hawk demonstrates genuine concern for the people serving under him. His leadership emphasizes trust rather than intimidation. He recognizes Duke's potential, supports his team, accepts responsibility for difficult decisions. His calm confidence helps establish G.I. Joe as more than simply another military organization. It becomes a family built upon mutual respect. This atmosphere encourages audiences to care about the team's success because the members clearly care about one another. The friendship between Duke and Ripcord adds warmth throughout the film. Before the story expands into global conspiracies and futuristic technology, audiences first meet them as ordinary soldiers joking during convoy duty. These conversations may appear relatively simple, but they perform an essential emotional function. They establish genuine friendship before danger arrives. Because viewers witness their camaraderie early, later moments of cooperation feel authentic. Their humor also provides important emotional balance. Without occasional lighter scenes, the relentless action might become exhausting. Instead, the movie alternates between tension and relief, allowing audiences brief opportunities to reconnect with the characters as people rather than warriors. Ripcord's own subplot involving Scarlet contributes another layer of emotional optimism. Although much less central than Duke and Anna's relationship, it introduces youthful confidence and playful attraction into the story. Adapting G.I. Joe into a live-action feature film presented an unusually complex creative challenge because the franchise did not originate from a single story. Unlike a novel, which provides one definitive narrative, or even many comic book series that have clearly established origins, G.I. Joe evolved over several decades across multiple forms of media. The property began as a line of military action figures during the 1960s before expanding into comic books, animated television series, novels, video games, and numerous toy relaunches. Each version introduced new ideas, revised existing characters, and expanded the mythology in different ways. As a result, the filmmakers were not adapting one specific storyline. Instead, they were adapting an entire franchise with decades of history, choosing which elements to preserve, which to modernize, and which to reinvent for a contemporary audience. Understanding the adaptation requires recognizing that G.I. Joe has experienced several major eras. The original 1960s action figures focused primarily on realistic military service. Characters represented different branches of the armed forces, emphasizing patriotism, teamwork, and traditional military values. These early figures contained relatively little fictional mythology. They were designed more as representations of soldiers than as characters participating in an ongoing narrative. Everything changed during the early 1980s with the introduction of G.I. Joe, a real American hero. This relaunch fundamentally redefined the franchise. Instead of ordinary soldiers, audiences now followed an elite special operations team fighting Cobra, a mysterious terrorist organization equipped with advanced technology, unusual vehicles, and colorful villains. The franchise became a blend of military action, science fiction, espionage, superhero adventure, and comic book storytelling. This version became the primary inspiration for the 2009 film. However, even within the 1980s era, there were significant differences between the animated television series and the comic books. The animated series generally emphasized colorful action, memorable villains, futuristic technology, and family-friendly adventure. The comic books often adopted a more grounded tone, exploring military tactics, political consequences, psychological trauma, and deeper character development. The film ultimately borrows ideas from both interpretations. From the cartoons, it embraces spectacular technology, hidden bases, elaborate costumes, and globe-spanning adventure. From the comics, it incorporates somewhat more serious character relationships and personal conflicts. Rather than choosing one approach exclusively, the movie attempts to combine both. Perhaps the most noticeable adaptation choice involves the overall tone. The original cartoons celebrated exaggerated action, laser weapons, fantastic vehicles, impossible technology, clearly defined heroes and villains. The filmmakers largely preserve this spirit instead of pursuing complete realism. Nanomite weapons, accelerator suits, underwater Arctic headquarters, advanced aircraft. These elements remain faithful to the franchise's larger-than-life imagination, even though their visual presentation becomes more sophisticated through modern filmmaking. At the same time, the movie updates the technology to reflect 21st century scientific interests. The original cartoons frequently featured futuristic inventions that reflected Cold War-era speculation. The live-action film replaces many older concepts with nanotechnology, advanced engineering, and biotechnology. These changes help contemporary audiences accept the fictional science more easily, because nanotechnology already existed as an emerging real-world field of research. One of the most significant adaptation decisions concerns the G.I. Joe organization itself. In many earlier versions, G.I. Joe primarily functioned as an American military unit. The live-action film transforms it into a multinational task force supported by governments around the world. This change reflects both creative and commercial considerations. From a storytelling perspective, international cooperation raises the global scale of the narrative. From a business perspective, it makes the movie more accessible to worldwide audiences by presenting the heroes as representatives of international security rather than one nation's military. The character of Duke undergoes several important changes during adaptation. Within the franchise, Duke has long been one of G.I. Joe's central leaders. The film preserves his role as a courageous field commander but significantly expands his emotional backstory. His romantic history with Anna Lewis becomes one of the movie's primary emotional storylines. This relationship does not occupy the same central position across earlier versions of the franchise. The filmmakers introduced it to create stronger personal stakes. Rather than simply fighting Cobra because it threatens the world, Duke also fights to save someone he once loved. This adaptation choice helps humanize him for audiences unfamiliar with the source material. Anna Lewis, who becomes the Baroness, experiences one of the most dramatic transformations. Traditionally, the Baroness existed as one of Cobra's most loyal and dangerous operatives. She possessed considerable intelligence, strategic ability, and unwavering commitment to Cobra. The movie preserves her combat skills and visual identity while dramatically altering her origin. Instead of beginning as an established Cobra agent, she becomes someone manipulated through scientific experimentation. This allows the film to explore themes of memory, identity, and redemption. The change also strengthens Duke's emotional journey because his desire to rescue Anna creates personal conflict beyond the larger military mission. Some longtime fans appreciated the additional emotional complexity. Others prefer the original version in which the Baroness willingly embraced Cobra's ideology. Snake Eyes remains one of the most faithful adaptations. His visual design closely resembles earlier interpretations. One of the most enjoyable aspects of G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, is that it rewards viewers who pay close attention to the background details, character names, visual references, dialogue, and connections to the larger G.I. Joe franchise. While the movie is designed to be accessible for audiences with no previous knowledge of the property, longtime fans can recognize dozens of subtle nods to the toys, animated series, comic books, and decades of franchise history. Some of these references are immediately recognizable, while others are so carefully hidden that many viewers miss them during their first viewing. These hidden details not only celebrate the franchise's legacy, but also help expand the fictional universe beyond what is directly shown on screen. Perhaps the most obvious collection of Easter eggs involves the character names. To casual viewers, names such as Duke, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Ripcord, Heavy Duty, Breaker, Covergirl, Storm Shadow, Hawk, Destro, Cobra Commander, Baroness, and Dr. Mindbender simply identify members of the story. For longtime fans, however, each name represents decades of established franchise history. Many of these characters first appeared in the early 1980s toy line before receiving expanded personalities through comic books and animated television. Simply hearing these familiar code names immediately connects the film to its source material. The movie also preserves the military tradition of assigning colorful code names rather than relying exclusively on real names. This reflects one of the defining characteristics of G.I. Joe across nearly every version of the franchise. Another subtle detail involves the opening sequence set in 17th century France. At first, this historical scene appears disconnected from the modern storyline. However, it quietly establishes the McCullen family's centuries-long involvement in weapons manufacturing. Longtime fans recognize that Destro's family heritage has always played an important role within the franchise. Rather than introducing this history through dialogue later in the movie, the filmmakers visually establish it from the beginning. This opening also reinforces one of the movie's central themes. Technology evolves, weapons change, but humanity's relationship with warfare remains remarkably consistent across generations. One of the film's clever visual callbacks concerns Destro's famous metal mask. Throughout much of the movie, James McCullen appears without it. Viewers unfamiliar with G.I. Joe may simply assume this is his normal appearance. Fans, however, know that the mask is one of Destro's defining visual characteristics. Every scene featuring McCullen therefore creates anticipation. The audience waits for the moment when the iconic transformation finally occurs. When he ultimately receives the metal face following his injuries, it functions as both a dramatic story development and a reward for longtime followers of the franchise. Rather than wearing the mask immediately, the film treats it almost like the completion of his origin story. Snake Eyes contains numerous hidden references despite speaking no dialogue. His silence itself represents one of the most faithful aspects of his characterization. Although different versions of the franchise have occasionally explored his backstory differently, his refusal to speak has long been one of his defining traits. The filmmakers preserve this completely. His communication relies almost entirely upon body language, gestures, and action. This makes every movement significant. Even subtle nods or pauses carry emotional meaning because verbal explanation never interrupts his scenes. His costume also includes numerous details inspired by earlier designs. While modernized for live-action realism, the black tactical armor closely resembles the iconic appearance that generations of fans immediately recognize. The visor, the armored plating, the sword, the overall silhouette. Each element reflects decades of visual evolution while remaining unmistakably Snake Eyes. Storm Shadow receives similar attention. Although his costume incorporates realistic fabrics and updated textures, its predominantly white appearance remains intentionally faithful to earlier interpretations. The visual contrast between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow continues one of the franchise's oldest symbolic relationships. Black and white, shadow and light, brotherhood divided, good and evil. Although these colors do not necessarily represent complete moral absolutes, they immediately communicate the rivalry between the two warriors. One interesting hidden detail involves their sword fights. Many viewers focus primarily on the choreography. However, fans recognize that nearly every confrontation references years of shared history established in previous G.I. Joe stories. Every duel carries emotional weight, extending beyond what the film explicitly explains. The filmmakers rely upon visual storytelling rather than lengthy exposition, trusting knowledgeable audiences to recognize the significance. The Cobra logo appears repeatedly throughout the movie, sometimes in surprisingly subtle locations. Beyond obvious uniforms and vehicles, attentive viewers can spot Cobra insignias integrated into computer displays, laboratory equipment, architecture, and technological interfaces. This reinforces the impression that Cobra functions as a highly organized global network rather than a collection of isolated operatives. The recurring symbol quietly reminds audiences that Cobra's influence extends into every aspect of its operations. Likewise, the G.I. Joe emblem appears throughout headquarters, aircraft, equipment, and uniforms. Rather than drawing constant attention to itself, the symbol naturally becomes part of the environment. This subtle production design helps establish organizational identity without excessive dialogue. The accelerator suits contain another layer of franchise adaptation. Although they represent new technology created specifically for the film, their exaggerated abilities capture the spirit of many imaginative vehicles and gadgets featured throughout the toy line. Instead of reproducing every classic invention exactly, the filmmakers condensed the franchise's love of futuristic technology into a smaller number of versatile concepts. The accelerator suits therefore function almost as symbolic representations of G.I. Joe's long history of advanced military equipment. One particularly enjoyable Easter egg involves Cobra Commander himself. The business story behind G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra is almost as interesting as the movie itself. Long before the cameras started rolling, the project represented far more than a single summer blockbuster. For Paramount Pictures and Hasbro, the film was intended to become the foundation of a long-term multimedia franchise capable of generating revenue through theatrical releases, home entertainment, television licensing, merchandising, toys, video games, publishing, and international markets. Like several other toy-based adaptations released during the late 2000s, the movie was designed to introduce a classic brand to a new generation while also encouraging longtime fans to reconnect with a property that had existed for decades. Financially, the film achieved mixed but ultimately significant results. It earned enough money to justify a sequel, yet it also generated debate regarding its profitability, critical reception, and long-term franchise strategy. Understanding the business performance begins with the timing of the project. The late 2000s represented a period when Hollywood studios increasingly looked toward recognizable intellectual properties rather than completely original concepts. Familiar brands already possessed built-in audiences, reducing some of the financial uncertainty associated with launching entirely new franchises. Comic books were becoming major box office attractions. Classic television series were receiving cinematic reboots. Toy companies also recognized that films could dramatically increase consumer interest in their products. Hasbro had already witnessed enormous success through another property. The live-action Transformers films demonstrated that toys could successfully evolve into blockbuster cinematic franchises. Those films generated impressive theatrical revenue, while simultaneously boosting toy sales around the world. Naturally, Hasbro hoped G.I. Joe could produce similar results. Although the two franchises differed significantly in tone and subject matter, they shared several important advantages. Both possessed decades of brand recognition. Both featured extensive toy lines. Both contained large ensembles of colorful characters. Both offered opportunities for sequels, spin-offs, and merchandise. As a result, G.I. Joe became one of Hasbro's highest-profile entertainment investments. The production budget reflected these ambitious expectations. Reports generally placed the production cost at approximately $175 million before marketing expenses. This immediately positioned the film among the more expensive productions of its time. Several factors contributed to this substantial investment. Large international filming locations, extensive visual effects, complex action sequences, massive physical sets, star-studded ensemble casting, sophisticated costume design, advanced digital production. Unlike smaller action films focused primarily on realistic combat, The Rise of Cobra required futuristic technology, computer-generated environments, hidden headquarters, and elaborate military hardware. Every one of these elements increased production costs. Marketing represented another enormous financial commitment. Major blockbuster releases rarely rely solely on theatrical advertising. Instead, studios coordinate global promotional campaigns involving television commercials, online marketing, magazine coverage, convention appearances, product partnerships, interviews, and promotional events. Because G.I. Joe already existed as a recognizable toy brand, marketing also benefited from cross-promotion through Hasbro's existing retail network. Toy packaging referenced the upcoming film. Retail displays highlighted movie merchandise. Advertising frequently connected the cinematic experience with collectible products. This synergy between entertainment and consumer products formed one of the project's central business strategies. The movie premiered during the competitive summer release season. Summer has traditionally represented one of Hollywood's most profitable periods because schools close, families attend theaters more frequently, and audiences actively seek large-scale entertainment. However, summer also creates intense competition. Multiple major studios release blockbuster productions within a relatively short period. Success, therefore, depends not only upon quality but also on timing, audience interest, marketing effectiveness, and competition from other films. Opening weekend plays an especially important role in modern blockbuster economics. A strong debut often generates positive media attention while encouraging additional audiences to purchase tickets. The Rise of Cobra opened with solid commercial performance. Its initial weekend demonstrated that audience curiosity remained high despite mixed critical reviews released shortly before opening. This illustrates an important distinction within the entertainment industry. Critics and general audiences do not always respond identically. Many viewers attended primarily because they wanted exciting action, recognizable characters, and large-scale spectacle. The film generally delivered those expectations. Worldwide, the movie ultimately earned more than $300 million at the global box office. International markets contributed significantly to this total. This international performance reflected changing trends within Hollywood. For decades, domestic earnings often determined a movie's financial success. By the late 2000s, overseas markets had become equally important, sometimes surpassing domestic revenue entirely. Large-scale action films frequently performed especially well internationally because visual storytelling translated easily across different languages and cultures. Action, special effects, adventure, heroic conflict. These elements possess broad, global appeal. G.I. Joe benefited from this international accessibility. Although some dialogue and military terminology remained specifically American, the larger narrative emphasized global cooperation rather than exclusively national interests. This made the movie more attractive to audiences worldwide. When evaluating profitability, however, theatrical revenue alone does not tell the complete story. Movie theaters retain a significant percentage of ticket sales. Marketing expenses substantially increase total investment. Additional distribution costs further affect financial calculations. As a result, earning twice the production budget at the box office does not automatically guarantee enormous profits. Few action franchises have a fan community with a history as long and diverse as G.I. Joe. By the time G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra was released in 2009, the brand had already existed for nearly half a century. During those decades, it had evolved through several different generations of fans. Some grew up with the original military action figures of the 1960s. Others became devoted followers of the 1980s, a real American hero toy line and animated series, while another generation discovered the franchise through comic books, video games, and later animated productions. Because of this long history, the live-action film entered a fandom that was already passionate, knowledgeable, and deeply invested in the characters. Rather than creating an audience from scratch, the movie inherited one of the most established fan communities in the toy and action-adventure world. One of the most interesting aspects of the G.I. Joe fandom is its diversity. Unlike many franchises that appeal primarily to one age group, G.I. Joe has continuously attracted new audiences across multiple generations. Parents who played with the toys during childhood often introduced them to their own children. Comic book readers became animation fans. Animation fans became collectors. Collectors became convention organizers. This cycle helped the franchise remain culturally relevant for decades. When The Rise of Cobra premiered, theaters contained viewers with very different relationships to the property. Some remembered watching the animated series every afternoon after school. Others had shelves filled with vintage action figures. Some had never experienced G.I. Joe before and simply want to see a large-scale summer action movie. This mixture of longtime fans and newcomers significantly shaped audience discussion. For veteran fans, one of the first questions was whether the movie respected the source material. Whenever a beloved franchise receives a live-action adaptation, existing fans naturally compare every creative decision to earlier versions. Costumes, character personalities, vehicles, storylines, dialogue, relationships. Every detail becomes part of the conversation. Some fans are delighted to see iconic characters such as Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Scarlet, Duke, Destro, Cobra Commander, and the Baroness finally brought into live action with modern visual effects. Simply seeing these familiar names and designs on the big screen created excitement. For many viewers, childhood memories became part of the movie-going experience. Other fans approached the adaptation more critically. Certain changes to character origins generated considerable debate. The revised relationship between Duke and the Baroness became one of the most frequently discussed topics. Some appreciated the added emotional depth. Others preferred the original comic book and animated interpretations. Similarly, Cobra Commander's origin story divided opinions. Some enjoyed the gradual transformation into the classic villain. Others wished he had appeared immediately in his more familiar role. These disagreements reflected a common pattern within long-running fandoms. Fans often share deep affection for the same franchise while holding very different ideas about which version represents the definitive interpretation. Snake Eyes quickly became one of the film's most universally praised elements within the fan community. Longtime followers appreciated how faithfully the movie preserved his defining characteristics. His silence, his loyalty, his martial arts abilities, his rivalry with Storm Shadow. These qualities remained immediately recognizable despite the updated visual presentation. Even viewers with mixed opinions about the film often singled out Snake Eyes as one of its strongest successes. Storm Shadow received similar praise. The rivalry between the two ninjas had always been one of G.I. Joe's most beloved storylines. Fans enjoyed seeing years of comic book and animated history translated into live-action choreography. Although the film condensed much of their shared past, audiences generally recognized the emotional importance of their relationship. Many discussions online focused specifically on their fight scenes, costumes, and future potential in sequels. Internet communities played an enormous role in shaping fan reactions. By 2009, online discussion forums had become central gathering places for movie fans. Dedicated G.I. Joe websites, fan forums, collector communities, and entertainment message boards filled with conversations analyzing every trailer, promotional image, casting announcement, and eventually every scene in the finished film. Weeks before release, fans carefully examined screenshots, searching for hidden references to the comics and animated series. Every new promotional photograph generated lengthy speculation. Would Cobra Commander wear the mask? How closely would Snake Eyes resemble the comics? Would Destro have the silver face? Could this become the beginning of a larger cinematic universe? These conversations helped build anticipation long before opening weekend. After release, discussions shifted toward detailed analysis. Fans compared favorite scenes, ranked characters, debated adaptation choices, shared theories regarding future installments. Unlike casual audiences who watched the film once, dedicated fans frequently revisited individual scenes to identify Easter eggs and hidden references. Collecting remained one of the defining characteristics of the fandom. Hasbro released numerous action figures based on the film, including heroes, villains, vehicles, and exclusive editions. Collectors often purchased multiple versions of the same character. Some figures remained sealed inside original packaging. Others became part of elaborate displays, recreating scenes from a movie. Photographers within the community created highly detailed toy photography, positioning figures in realistic environments and sharing images online. These photographs often blurred the line between toys and cinematic storytelling. Fan customization represented another important aspect of community creativity. Some collectors repainted movie figures to more closely resemble comic book appearances. Others created entirely original characters using parts from multiple action figures. When G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra was released in 2009, it arrived during a period of enormous change in blockbuster filmmaking. Comic book movies were rapidly becoming Hollywood's dominant form of entertainment. Visual effects technology was advancing at an incredible pace, and studios were increasingly searching for recognizable intellectual properties that could support long-running cinematic franchises. In that environment, expectations surrounding the film were exceptionally high. Audiences were not simply judging whether it was an entertaining action movie. Many were evaluating whether it could become the next major franchise alongside other blockbuster series of the era. As a result, The movie received a mixed initial reception, with critics and fans debating everything from its tone and visual effects to its faithfulness to the source material. More than 15 years later, however, the conversation surrounding the Rise of Cobra has changed considerably. While the film remains divisive in certain respects, it has also gained a level of appreciation that was less common during its original theatrical release. One of the biggest factors influencing modern reassessment is changing expectations. In 2009, many viewers expected G.I. Joe to become a relatively grounded military action film. The marketing emphasized elite soldiers, advanced technology, global terrorism, international espionage. Some audiences therefore anticipated something resembling realistic military thrillers with only limited science fiction elements. Instead, the movie embraced the more exaggerated spirit of the original toy line and animated series. Accelerator suits, nanomite weapons, hidden underwater bases, comic book-inspired villains, highly stylized action sequences. For viewers expecting realism, this approach created disappointment. Looking back today, however, modern audiences generally understand much earlier that the movie is intentionally embracing pulp adventure rather than military realism. This shift in expectations has significantly influenced how people evaluate the film. Many viewers now approach it as a colorful science fiction action movie instead of comparing it directly to realistic war films. As a result, elements that once attracted criticism are often viewed more positively because they align with the movie's intended style. Another major factor involves the evolution of superhero cinema. When The Rise of Cobra premiered, comic book adaptations were still developing their modern identity. Today, audiences are accustomed to cinematic universes featuring impossible technology, hidden organizations, advanced artificial intelligence, alternate realities, magical artifacts, and extraordinary heroes. Compared to many contemporary blockbuster films, G.I. Joe's futuristic concepts no longer appear unusually exaggerated. Nanotechnology and experimental military equipment feel relatively familiar within modern popular culture. Ironically, ideas that seemed excessive to some viewers in 2009 often appear comparatively restrained by today's standards. Visual effects also receive different evaluations today. During its original release, several critics argued that certain CGI-heavy sequences relied too heavily on computer-generated imagery. The Paris chase became one of the most frequently discussed examples. Some audiences believe the digital effects reduced the sense of realism. Modern reassessment often places these sequences within historical context. The late 2000s represented a transitional period in blockbuster filmmaking. Studios increasingly experimented with ambitious digital environments, while practical and digital techniques continued evolving together. Viewed through this historical perspective, many of the visual effects demonstrate impressive ambition even when certain shots reveal the technological limitations of their era. Rather than dismissing the CGI entirely, modern audiences often appreciate the filmmaker's willingness to imagine spectacular action on a massive scale. The performances have also benefited from retrospective viewing. When the movie first premiered, much discussion focused on whether individual actors matched fan expectations for iconic characters. Years later, viewers often evaluate the cast more on the basis of entertainment value than strict accuracy. Snake Eyes remains one of the film's most consistently praised characters. His silent determination, his martial arts choreography, his visual design, his rivalry with Storm Shadow. These qualities continue receiving admiration from both longtime fans and newcomers. Storm Shadow likewise enjoys lasting popularity. His fight scenes remain among the movie's highlights. Many fans now regard the Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow storyline as one of the strongest aspects of the entire production. Their relationship possesses emotional weight, extending beyond the larger military conflict. This subplot has arguably aged better than many initially expected. Duke has also undergone modest reevaluation. Early criticism sometimes described him as a relatively conventional action hero. However, Revisiting the film reveals greater emotional complexity than casual viewers may have noticed during theatrical release. His determination to save Anna rather than simply defeat her distinguishes him from many action protagonists. Modern audiences often recognize this emotional storyline as one of the film's stronger narrative elements. The relationship between Duke and Anna remains somewhat melodramatic, but it provides the story with genuine emotional motivation beneath the large-scale spectacle. One interesting aspect of modern reassessment involves nostalgia. Many people who watched The Rise of Cobra as children are now adults. Unlike viewers approaching the movie primarily through comparison with earlier G.I. Joe media, this generation often remembers the film itself as part of childhood. For them, the movie represents an introduction to the franchise rather than a reinterpretation of something older. As with many blockbuster films released during childhood, nostalgia influences perception. Scenes once criticized by older audiences may now inspire affection because they are associated with personal memories. This generational shift has become increasingly common throughout popular culture.